Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Sport Business Podcast, getting you up to speed with the stories powering the global sports industry. I'm Catherine Davies, and I'm the host of this weekly podcast. Now this week, the focus is firmly on cricket, as we're just over a week away from the start of the 2026 Indian Premier League. I've got Matthew Williams and Fayez Samadi joining me on the pod today to bring their very sharp insights into the latest sponsorship news and trends in cricket, including the growth of the AI category and how teams are responding to restrictions on real money gaming. We'll also hear from Jonathan Rest, who's going to give us the lowdown on the numbers, which are anything but low, that have been cited in the sales process of two of the Indian Premier League's most storied franchises, RCB and Rajasthan Royals. And for more insight on the IPL, we have a short interview with none other than Mr. Lalit Modi, the founder and former chair of the IPL, about the next cycle of IPL media rights. He addresses how the rights could be packaged, when the BCCI will go to tender, who will bid, and crucially, how much the rights could command. Finally, we wrap up, as usual, with a quick look at what's coming our way in the weeks and months ahead. We've got an update from Jonathan Rest in New York on the latest industry news from the US, and we'll speak about whether latency is killing the streaming star in Southern Europe and what might be on the menu at the Masters tournament in Augusta. All this is coming your way very shortly. But before we start, we'd love to have your input on this or on any other Sport Business Podcast episode. Please leave us your feedback in a review on the Apple Podcast and Spotify platforms and let us know if you like what you're hearing and what you'd like to know more about. So without further ado, let's move straight on to our first topic of the day. Right, I'm here now with two members of our Sport Business sponsorship team, reporter and analyst Matthew Williams and deputy editor Fayez Samadi. Welcome to you both, gentlemen.
Hi, Catherine.
Thanks, Catherine.
Now, Matt, you and I spoke last week about sponsorship in Formula One, but Fayez, I don't think we've spoken on the pod since late last year, so it's good to have you back on. Before we get into the subject at hand, what has been taking up your time in the past few days, and in your case, Fayez, last few weeks or months?
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, it's lovely to be back. I've had a sort of extended break from the pod, at the end of the year. I just need to take some time. No, honestly, it's been great listening to everybody else contributing, and I figured I should try and come up with some wisdom. What have I been up to? I think the most exciting thing, which is a little while ago now, is I went skiing again for the first time in 21 years, about a month or so ago with some family. It was really nice. I was very nervous because, as I say, I hadn't skied in 21 years. And, I sort of put the skis on and then looked down the mountain and was like, oh, goodness me, what am I doing here? But I'm pleased to say that over 3 days of skiing, I only fell over 3 times. So I think that's a pretty good hit rate. And I'd forgotten just how amazing skiing is. So it was a lovely experience.
It's like riding a bike. You don't forget, do you?
Yeah, that's what everyone kept telling me. And I was like, being very blasé about this. But then, you know what? Most people were actually correct. After a couple of little runs and things, I was back in the mix.
Well, good on you. Matt, what's been new for you? It's only been a week, but I'm sure something has happened.
Well, obviously Fayez has been off skiing. He's thinking about that, but we've been hard at work at Sport Business Sponsorship as well, putting together, Fayez and myself working together on a snapshot about the ICC T20 World Cup. Another sort of element of the cricket market covered there. We're going to come on to talk about a different element today. But just published today, 19th of March, the T20 World Cup snapshot focusing on the team side of the tournament. So yeah, Fayez and I both worked on that.
Superb. I can't wait to get stuck into that. I highly recommend that people look at our sponsorship section and all the latest snapshots from the team because you're doing fabulous work there, you guys. Now, let's move on to the subject of the day, cricket, and rightly so, with the Indian Premier League, the sport's biggest show, due to start in just over a week, I believe, with the defending champions RCB taking on the Sunrisers Hyderabad in Bengaluru. Did I say that right? Bengaluru?
Yeah, all good.
And, okay, sponsorship revenue from this year's tournament, I'm sure, has been breaking all kinds of records. And from what you've told me, Matt, the AI category has been trending across the sport. What impact has it had in the IPL market?
Yeah, it's been interesting to follow in the IPL and in cricket more generally, really. There's been a bit of a race for market share going on between the sort of big AI chatbot brands in the Indian market specifically. For a bit of background on that, the Indian market's actually really important as a growth opportunity for these brands, just to add some weight to that. Bank of America published some research in December at the end of last year, identifying the country as the largest and most active market for the adoption of generative AI apps. And obviously we're talking about the likes of ChatGPT, Perplexity, Google Gemini, and even ChatGPT CEO Sam Altman recently revealed that India is already its second largest market at 100 million weekly active users. So these brands are jostling for market position in India. It's a huge opportunity for them. And we're now seeing that play out in the cricket space, really. And most notably, in terms of the IPL, Google Gemini has come on board as a central sponsor of the league. So obviously a bit of a significant capture for the BCCI, who obviously run and operate and own the IPL. The arrival of Gemini is interesting as well in that it follows a deal that ChatGPT began at the start of this year for the Women's Premier League, which is the women's equivalent of the IPL. So that kind of encapsulates how brands are almost using the cricket market, and in Gemini's case, the IPL, as they battle for market share in India.
Matt's done all the hard work on this and gone deep into the deals with the IPL and the WKL. I just think it's sort of worth pointing out that, everybody's talking about AI in sport, and at Sport Business, we've written lots of stories about new sponsorships with AI firms, a range of them. But so far, you look at these deals and they're always going for the top of whatever sport they're looking in. So, most prominently Formula One, right? That's showcasing technology. So many AI brands in the last couple of years have come into Formula One. More recently, we've been writing about things like the Premier League, signing sort of AI-focused deals with the likes of Microsoft and Adobe. And then, these AI brands look at cricket, and what's the first thing they look at? The IPL, and it just shows you where the sort of power base of global cricket is to some of the biggest companies in the world. They want to get to the top of that sport. They want to get to the top of football. They go to the Premier League. They want to get to the top of motorsport. They go to the F1. They want to get to the top of cricket, and they go to the IPL. So I think it just shows the strength of the IPL, domestically within India, but it, competes against anything on the national stage as well, which I think is worth pointing out.
Yeah, and I think to follow up on that, I think it's important to note as well that Google Gemini, they may not be finished yet. In one of our recent features on Sport Business Sponsorship on this very subject, we heard from Nikhil Bardia, who's head of Rise Worldwide, Indian-based sports marketing agency, who talked about the idea that perhaps Gemini could follow up their central deal with some team deals at some point to give them more of a sort of holistic marketing opportunity across the IPL. It's all about really, for these brands, much like in Formula One, Fire's references there, how big a market that's been for AI. Much like that, they're trying to use cricket as a showcase opportunity to the Indian market. The eyeballs on the IPL in India, it's the biggest ticket in sports. So they're really trying to showcase their products and how they can be integrated into, daily life for consumers.
Right. Well, as we discussed in the podcast way back in August, was when you were last on the podcast talking about cricket, Fayez, new legislation on real money gaming has had a big impact on the IPL market, bringing an end to Dream 11's 5 front-of-shirt deals. Now, Fayez, how have the teams responded over the last, 8 months now, I guess, to that new legislation?
Yeah, I mean, I know we've talked about it a lot, but can't understate how seismic a shift that was for sort of the Indian sort of gaming, online fantasy gaming market, but also all the ensuing marketing, advertising, sponsorship spend. It sort of basically ceased overnight with the changing of the laws around prohibiting real money gaming online. And I think that's been the tipping point of the sort of precipitating a real shift with particularly IPL teams. I know Matt's just talked about AI, and obviously that's kind of bleeding edge, but we're talking about AI products from some of the biggest companies in the world, the most valuable companies in the world. What I would say, I don't know, let me try and be sort of sum it up here. Like, sort of the dalliance with speculative tech is over in Indian cricket, I would say. It was only 2 or 3 years ago that most people's portfolios were packed full of sort of tech startups, whether they were fintech, whether they were edtech, sort of Indian-based startups. You've got the likes of, Byju's taking the front of shirt for India. You had Upstocks, you had Unacademy, I could go on. There were lots of these sort of new economy companies, and they all appear to have, either had their own financial difficulties and fallen by the wayside, or perhaps not hit the heights they wanted to and had to rein in their spend and therefore drop their IPL sponsorships. Fair enough. The one that was kind of cut out from that was real money gaming. Dream 11's a huge company, massively successful, and its nearest rival, My 11 Circle, they were very heavily present in IPL sponsorship. Teams felt very comfortable taking on those sponsorships. If you only got to look to Dream 11, who last season had 5 front of shirts across 5 different IPL franchises, and then suddenly that gets taken away from them. That's sort of, it's not anything that happened to Dream 11 as such, that's the legislation. So suddenly that's gone. And my inkling, and from speaking to people, I think Matt's had the same, that, you know, some of these teams are feeling a little bit burnt or a little bit, you know, falling out of love with that sort of new economy tech sector. And you can just see that it's reflected in this massive reversion back to traditional manufacturing-based sponsorships. You know, if you take the 5 teams that had Dream 11 sponsorships, you know, you've got Sunrisers Hyderabad, they've moved to Shree Cement company. Lucknow Supergiants, KEI Industries, they make specialty cables for construction. Punjab Kings, CP Plus, they're a bit different. They're a sort of security surveillance based company, but they're based out of India, and they produce hardware for, you know, for security and surveillance. Kolkata Knight Riders, they've gone back to Hero Motorcore with their Vida mobility brand, but that's, you know, the heartland of that is automotive. Gujarat Titans have gone to Birla Estates. They're a big real estate company. So you think about these sectors: cement, cables, automotive, real estate. They're traditional manufacturing sectors. And I think that's been the big change, that everybody's looking at those as opposed to where's the next new sort of tech opportunity for me to connect with consumers. Again, accepting everything Matt said about AI with Gemini and ChatGPT, because they're massive. And I think some of that is also linked to just Indian government's push really around development and manufacturing and building and construction across the country. There are lots of government programs that are helping subsidize or provide incentives to manufacturing companies. So, for example, there's the Natural Manufacturing Mission, which was sort of launched last year, that's built on this Made in India policy they've had since 2014. You know, that's to really push manufacturers and get them to sort of compete on a global level and provide them support to do that. Part of that is growth. Having money for that growth is marketing. And the best way to get any marketing around India is to be part of the IPL, because whether you're targeting a tier 1 city that's building, you know, big glass skyscrapers, or you're targeting a tier 4, 5 city that's very small, or a town, anyone in either of those places has a mobile phone and they're watching the IPL, right?
Mm.
And you want to get your business into there. Similarly, they have something called the Production Linked Incentive Scheme, which I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on, but my understanding is it's providing subsidies from the government for 14 sectors. And a lot of those sectors are, again, sort of electrical cabling, construction, steel, manufacturing. So, you know, the quicker you grow and the more you sell in those sectors, the more subsidy you get. You know, that's helping those companies grow, and a great way for them to get their name out there, even though they sound like fairly, let's be honest, boring companies. No one gets excited about cement or pipes or electricity cables, but it's working really well for them because the IPL takes them wherever they need to go. And from the team side, you know, these are huge, solid companies. I would be surprised if there was a sudden regulation change that meant the cement industry could no longer sponsor, or the automotive industry could no longer sponsor. So I think the IPL package is now reflecting more of that national push towards manufacturing, construction, development of India, and the IPL is helping people from those companies get their message out.
I just want to add that it is interesting that from the team's perspective, whilst there's kind of, I guess, been in some ways a step back towards these more traditional companies, it hasn't meant a step back in sponsorship revenue. You know, I understand that the general trend is that these front of shirt fees have actually gone up. The valuations of the front of shirt contracts have actually increased on what Dream 11 were playing in the case of the majority of those 5 teams. You know, certainly I understand Punjab Kings and Gujarat Titans were able to achieve, you know, significant solid uplifts. So that is interesting. Obviously, you know, time has passed since those initial Dream 11 deals were signed, but it shows a positive commercial trajectory for the teams in the IPL.
I don't want to paint these IPL teams as regressive in any way, not at all. I think just want to be clear that when I'm talking about those cement and those manufacturing companies, that's for the front of shirt, right, which is the most expensive asset. So exactly as Matt said, not only have they got to these companies, they've managed to get more money out of them, which is great, but also lower down the tier, there are still lots of sponsors from, you know, different sorts of sectors, new economy sectors, digital economy sectors. They're just not going for those top tier deals. So that wasn't the IPL teams are still talking to everybody. It just seems that in that top tier front of shirt asset, they've gone for sort of safety, and then anything that's a bit more risky, maybe they're doing as a lower tier partnership.
Right. In that vein, then, which new deals or entrants have caught your eye?
One that caught my eye, which was very recent, was Tommy Hilfiger Travel, I believe, have signed a sponsorship with the Lucknow Supergiants to be their sort of official travel accessory partner. I love how they find these categories. It's amazing. You know, they can slice them so finely. But I just caught my eye because it was the first of that sort of sponsorship in the IPL, I think, where outside of kit manufacturers, you know, Tommy Hilfiger is a sort of a high-end fashion label. It's not a deal for like their clothes as such. It's for their sort of luxury luggage and suitcases and accessories around that and travel bags and things. But it's clearly sort of a product placement play for them so that, you know, when people, all the millions of people that are watching Lucknow Supergiants, they see the guys come off the plane or walk into the hotel with their like flash gear and stuff. And I just thought it's interesting. I feel a bit like this has been due for the IPL, right? These people are playing the IPL, these men and women, you know, outside of the, well, IPL's men, WPL women, outside of Bollywood stars. They're the biggest stars in the country. And like product placement with superstars is something that's sort of as old as time, really, when it comes to marketing. So I thought it was interesting. They look quite sleek. And I wonder if any other brands will think about, okay, maybe we need a partnership that allows us to showcase our luxury high-end products for travelers, upwardly mobile Indians who might be going abroad. It might be a different kind of product. But that one, while it's a lower tier deal, it caught my eye, and I wonder if there may be more to come in that vein.
Yeah, and I've just been looking at categories that might be trending over the next, weeks, months, whether it's this season or next season in the IPL. They might come into the market more, or we might see a new player come in. And I think the beer category is actually interesting, specifically the non-alcoholic products of major beer companies. It's interesting to note that AB InBev signed a global partnership with the ICC earlier this year, and the activation of that kind of led off by the T20 World Cup that's just finished in India, the men's T20 World Cup. And within the activation there, they focused on their 0.0% beer brand, which, is obviously necessary given restrictions on alcohol advertising in India. But it's interesting to see whether that might translate into the IPL at some point. It's something we see a lot of F1 teams do. They leverage the fact that there are opportunities now with beer brands that have these 0.0% brands, even in some markets that F1 goes to, and the F1 visits that might have restrictions on alcohol advertising. So I think it'll be interesting to see if anything develops in that category. Kingfisher, one of the most dominant beer brands in the Indian market, has had IPL team deals over past seasons, recent seasons with various teams, and often activated their water brand. I'm interested to see if 0.0% brands come into it as we see more and more of their activation presence in global sport. There's also, you mentioned that RCB are the defending champions, Royal Challengers Bengaluru. It's interesting that they've actually had a change at the front of shirt level. They're one of the most attractive teams commercially in the IPL, largely driven by the presence of Virat Kohli amongst their squad, who's undoubtedly really, in terms of active players, one of the biggest stars in world cricket and obviously in India. They've always been a team that's been able to attract some interesting brands commercially. The most recent front of shirt deal prior to this year was with Qatar Airways. So, quite a heavyweight global brand, global airline. For this season, they've actually swapped, or the Qatar Airways deal hasn't been extended, and a brand called Nothing, that is in fact the brand name, a smartphone brand called Nothing, based out of London, they already had a sponsorship agreement with RCB. They were present on the team's trousers last season, and this season upgrading to front of shirt. So that's kind of an interesting, slightly surprising change from an analysis perspective. You think RCB, this was the first time they'd won the IPL last season. They still got the biggest star, or one of the biggest stars in cricket, playing for them. It would have been probably a natural progression or transition if Qatar Airways was going to end for another major global brand to come in. That would have been probably the expectation from an analyst side. So to see a brand like Nothing come in is interesting, and be interesting to see as well how they activate the front of shirt opportunity, because it's one of the most visible and high potential assets in the market.
It's an interesting move, right? Because, Nothing must be banking on perhaps selling a lot of smartphones in India, because, they came in on as a lower tier sponsor, still kit sponsor. So, reasonable price, and they must have liked what they've seen. But I agree with Matt. It caught my eye too, just going from the tier one airline that everybody knows around the world having finally won the IPL to a sort of relatively young London-based mobile phone maker. I believe they released their first phone in 2022. So, really quite young. That's interesting.
It's not an insignificant, obviously, investment for nothing, which you were alluding to there, Fires, in the sense that this is one of the highest value assets in the market, as I was sort of suggesting before. There's other teams they could have gone for front of shirt with that were available this year. We've talked about some of them. After the Dream 11 thing, it was kind of a buyer's market potentially. There would have been lower sort of cost opportunities in the lead for front of shirt if they were purely looking at the sort of front of shirt visibility. So they're obviously, looking at the opportunity that RCB and Kohli provide with the sort of prestige and gravitas that they and he have. So yeah, a bold move. Let's see how it pays off for them.
Well, I think the name of the company is quite bold. It's quite surreal hearing you talk about, nothing on the front of the shirts and all that. I can see it becoming a cult favorite, that brand. So I think that should wrap up our section on IPL sponsorship. We're going to move on to more cricket in the next section. Thank you both. You'll be back at the end of the show to bring us your thoughts on any other business and looking ahead. And we'll take a short break now before we move on to our next section.
From private equity to global media and US college sports, unlock the most trusted data and insights in our reports. Explore more at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back to the Sport Business Podcast, bringing you the latest sport business industry news and insight. Now, Jonathan Rest has joined me on the line as he takes a break from meetings with the powers that be in the North American sports business sector in New York and Toronto to tell us about the latest investment news in cricket, and specifically the Indian Premier League. Now, the IPL is the biggest business in town in the Indian sports market, and India is the undisputed world power in T20 cricket on the pitch as well, fresh off its second consecutive title at the ICC T20 World Cup earlier this month. Now, John, it has recently emerged that two of the IPL's most storied franchises are simultaneously on the market. And the numbers being thrown around they really are staggering, aren't they?
Yeah, it is. It's you've got the Royal Challengers Bengaluru, fresh off their maiden IPL title last year, and you've got Rajasthan Royals who won the inaugural IPL, and they're both in a sales process at the moment that's at various stages. Two massive franchises selling kind of at the same time is a big deal.
Let's look at the big picture here. Why are IPL franchises suddenly attracting billion-dollar bids?
I think it comes down to two things, essentially, which is scarcity and money. There are only 10 IPL franchises. There's no plans to expand the number of teams soon. There may well be plans to expand the number of fixtures with different format, but it seems pretty settled on 10. Perhaps they'll go higher in future years, but you don't have many opportunities to buy these teams at the moment. A couple of them have come onto the market for their owners wanting to get out for different reasons. So that scarcity is driving up valuations. And then if you layer on top of that, your kind of extraordinary media rights deals they have. The current deals are 2023 to 2027. They're worth over 48,500 crore, which I think when the deal was signed in 2022, that was worth $6.2 billion US. Now, actually, I think that's worth about $5.2 billion now. So you can tell what happens with when kind of foreign exchange conversions come into things, but still kind of massive deals. And, each franchise is getting a substantial slice of that.
Well, now the buyer profiles here are really interesting. You've got private equity firms, sports franchises from other codes, and Indian industrialists all in the same room. What does that mix tell us about how the market perceives IPL assets? And is there any tension between financial investors looking for an exit and strategic owners who want to build long-term?
Yeah, I think it tells you that the asset has matured, essentially. I mean, in the early days of the IPL franchises, the hype was around kind of Bollywood stars who perhaps people outside of Asia hadn't really heard of buying these teams. There was industrialists, and then you had your kind of rich cricket enthusiasts in India. But all of these people kind of had an emotional connection to cricket. What you're seeing now is, I guess, the second, perhaps even third generation of ownership, where the asset's proven its financial model, it's attracting capital. And, there's no sentiment attached to a lot of the people that want to buy these teams, types of, Blackstone and Carlyle private equity firms. So they know what they're buying, and that's a cash generating business. So it's a closed league. There's no relegation. We know that kind of American finances like that. It's a dream, really, for private equity. But I think your point about tension is a fair one. Financial investors, private equity firms typically look at an exit strategy, 5 to 7 years perhaps. But then you've got strategic owners in there who are looking at this as, multi-decade long kind of connections and ownership to the fan base. So when you're building these cricket empires across multiple leagues and geographies, in some cases with some of these owners, they've got ownerships in other leagues. You've kind of got two different mindsets pulling in different directions when it comes to player investment, stadium development, perhaps even IPOs. I think the Chennai Super Kings were mulling an IPO for years, but it's very difficult if you've got different owners that want kind of exit strategies and other franchises that have got kind of long-term plans. So it's not just about the price, I think, on these. It's about what happens to the franchise going forward.
Can you walk us through the Rajasthan Royals sale? Where does that stand as we speak now?
Yeah, so that's probably the most advanced of the two that we've talked about. I think there's around 4 owners shortlisted. None of these have been kind of made totally public. There's been some strong reports in India. The leading bid, we understand, is around 1.3 billion from a consortium backed by a guy called Kal Samani, who's actually an existing investor in the team. So he's looking to grow his stake. He's seen kind of inside and firsthand the growth of this. You've also got a Times Internet group led by Satyan Gajwani. Now, he's the co-founder of Major League Cricket in the US. He's part of an investment group that bought London Spirit in the 100. You can see why his interest there is to kind of grow this kind of multi-club ownership that we talked about before in cricket. And you've got Rain Group, who were behind, they were behind the Chelsea and Manchester United sales, but they were also behind all the sales of the 100 franchises in England. So they're managing the sale of that. I think reports are that there's a floor valuation of about 1.1 billion, but obviously they're already above that. So yeah, remains to be seen where they go with that value.
And that's the Royals. What can you tell me about the Royal Challengers Bengaluru? Did I say that right?
You did, but let's call them RCB because it's a bit quicker.
RCB.
That's the more glamorous asset on the market, I think. Won their first title last year and, have got a huge fan base. Now, Diageo, the drinks business, they want out and they want out by March. They've already said that. So we're in March. So they are pushing for a sale quickly. Their valuation could really go anywhere up to around 2 billion, which is, vast. They've got the Glazers who are involved, still at Manchester United. They had a non-binding bid, which was reportedly valued at about $1.8 billion. You've got Adar Poonawalla, who's an Indian businessman who has a deal backed by US private equity. He's involved in a separate bid. There's also been names like David Blitzer linked. Now, David Blitzer obviously owns 76ers in the NBA, owns the Devils in the NHL. He has sports properties globally. You've also got, and I mentioned them earlier, private equity firms, Blackstone, Carlyle. You've got Sanjay Govil, who's a tech entrepreneur, also owns the Welsh Fire in the 100. So you're getting to see here a real mixture of big private equity firms, big US family funds, and people that have got existing cricket franchises.
Wow. So it's astonishing, isn't it? Those values that you mentioned, how do they compare with previous franchise sums?
Yeah, so in late 2021, the BCCI, the Board of Control for Cricket in India, which controls the IPL, they completed the bidding process for 2 new franchises. So that took us from 8 up to the 10 that we have now. So that we're going back 4 years or so by the time those deals came through. CVC bought Ahmedabad-based Gujarat Titans. They paid around $750 million for them. And Indian multinational RPSG bought the Lucknow Supergiants for around 940 million, so a bit more. So what we're talking about now, we're talking, 2 times that at least for some of the values that are going for. I mean, CVC actually sold their majority stake a year ago. They sold it to an Indian firm, Torrent Group, and that marked the first sale of a majority stake since the IPL launched in 2008. And the value then had the Gujarat Titans at around 860 million. Bearing in mind they bought in at 750. So the valuations have been kind of going up, over time, but nowhere near, we're talking double what they were 4 or 5 years ago.
You mentioned the BCCI, the governing body of the sport in India. What is their role in all of this? Can anyone just rock up and buy a team?
Well, not quite. I mean, there's certainly been a lot of interest in it. These are just some of the names that we know are buying it. There's plenty more that there aren't there. But the BCCI must ratify any deal, like the ECB had to do with the 100. The BCCI will take 5% of any transaction. So that's a healthy check still. And I guess the key point is that no single entity can own more than one franchise, for example. So anyone bidding on for the RCB and the Royals would have to choose one. And there have been instances, in January where the Glazers, for example, were extremely keen to get into the IPL in some shape or form. And, it might be that you bid for one, and if you don't get successful, you bid for the other. That happened in the 100 as well. There was franchises that went for a lot, and then there were investors that just wanted one city for some reason, or there were investors that wanted in and they'll take any team that they can get. But yeah, you can only own one franchise at a time.
You mentioned media rights previously and the eye-watering sums that the IPL rakes in from media rights. I think that vaulted them into our top 5 of global properties, possibly even second or third after the NFL and the Premier League. But how do these media rights, the valuations, how do they specifically drive team valuations?
Well, very directly, to put it bluntly. I think at the moment it's Star and Viacom, isn't it, that have the digital and the TV. They share it. These teams are sharing out roughly, I think it's 10,000 crore per year. It's a huge amount of money. Bearing in mind, what I said, 48,000 crore is $5.2 billion now. So each of these franchises is getting a significant amount of centrally distributed money. It's guaranteed annual income, regardless of where you're finishing as well. There is no relegation. So that kind of offers security to these investors. And I think the bid that is in for the Royals, the kind of leading bid, if you like, of the Somani consortium, which is 1.3 billion, that valuation that they put on that bid is explicitly contingent on the future trajectory of IPL media rights. So, they are placing a bet that after 2027, when these current deals end, that the rights are going to go even further. Some analysts believe it could even double, which will make the franchises today look very cheap. And if not, then there's going to be a stress test on the model, I expect.
Well, I've got a final question for you, and it's a big one to address in 2 minutes. But what does all of this mean for cricket's future as a business?
Well, I think it's more what people have been saying about sport in general, is that it's an asset class in its own right. And we're seeing that now with cricket. You don't get Blackstone and Carlyle and private equity firms wanting to come in and buy sports teams as such. They're buying an infrastructure, an ecosystem around that. And the fact that they are circling IPL franchises tells you everything. The next media rights cycle will be the big test, I think. And if it exceeds the current one, as I say, then they're going to look like bargains. But yeah, absolutely, cricket is a global asset class. And the more we have these franchise leagues coming up, we're looking already at, we talked about it on the pod before, about what's happening with the Big Bash in Australia. They are going to look like they're going to take on private equity for teams. I'm sure a lot of the names that I've dropped in here today are going to be interested in buying teams there and having a kind of a global cricket team, if you like. So I think it's only going to continue to increase in value.
Well, John, thank you for all of those superb insights into the business of cricket in India. You certainly get around, don't you? You'll be giving us some insights into what you found out in New York and Toronto and what's going on there. I'm looking forward to that. Thanks very much, and safe travels.
Take care.
Safe travels home, and we will speak to you again very soon. And now, to get more insight on the timing, packaging, and potential outcome for the next cycle of IPL media rights, we asked the competition's founder, Lalit Modi, for his take. Let's listen to what he has to say now.
They have to go to market before the 2028 season, but ideally, I think they will go to market, if I'm not mistaken, early next year, probably in the first quarter of 2027. In my view, they should package the rights individually, that is by different media types, different streamings, whether it's OTT, digital, satellite television, terrestrial television, mobile rights, and globally, country by country, I think they should individually market them actually, if they can, like EPL is doing now, and to a certain extent, Formula One is going to start to do. I think anybody and everybody who's in the broadcasting business would be looking at bidding, or in the mobile business should be looking at bidding. Every satellite company that is transmitting television content should be looking at it. I see all the companies, whether it's Netflix, Meta, or Apple, apart the new entrants, be looking at it along with Amazon. You would see some regional players like Bean, who want to expand their territory, also be looking at it. Of course, there's ESPN, Star Sports. I don't rule out Sony coming back into the market, but you may never know. There are other media players who might be looking at it without doubt. When I did the first media right deal, it was approximately 4 crore rupees per game. It went on in the second year, the value increased to close to about 10 crore rupees a game. And then I said in 2010, I see every cycle media rights doubling. And if you've seen it, from 4 crore rupees to close to 118 crore rupees today, the media rights have really increased, doubled every time. And so if I look at it today, it's going to be the next cycle. I don't see anything less than at least 70 to 100% uptake. Thank you.
And that finishes off a bumper podcast on cricket. Thank you, John. And before that, thank you to Matt and Fayez. And we're moving on to the final section of our podcast where Matt and Fayez will rejoin me to talk about what we're looking ahead to and any other business in the weeks ahead.
Stay ahead in the business of sport with trusted news, data, and analysis across media rights, sponsorship, and more. Explore our subscription options at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back to this final section of the Sport Business Podcast where we take a look at notable events and developments coming our way in the near future. Now, this week we've got a look-ahead piece all the way from New York, where chief correspondent and editor of Sport Business's On the Money newsletter, Jonathan Rest, has traveled to bring us a few hot off-the-press news items from the U.S. sports business sector. I think he was actually standing on a street corner in Manhattan, the version I heard, but our sound editor, Lumi, has taken out the ambient noise. So let's hear what he has to say from New York.
Hi, Catherine. Thought I'd send you a little note from my trip here in New York, where it is freezing cold. Spring has certainly not sprung yet. Been speaking to some key people in the industry over the last 24, 48 hours or so. I think basketball's a big topic, really. The Women's NBA and their Players Association finally, after more than 100 hours of negotiations this week, reached a verbal agreement on a new collective bargaining agreement. Now, this is all really linked to those huge media rights deals that the NBA signed, that the WNBA get a decent slice of, around $200 million a year through to 2036. So obviously the players want more of that, and they're going to get more. They are massively increasing their salary cap, each team, to $7 million from a current $1.5 million. That means the average salary in the WNBA is now going to be up to around $600,000. That is 5 times more than those players are earning at present on average. So yeah, that new season begins in May. Onto the men's NBA, and expansion really has been the buzzword. We've spoken at depth on the podcast about the NBA's plans in Europe. Well, those non-binding bids for the franchises are actually due at the end of this month. Now, there's going to be a Board of Governors meeting with the NBA next week, but that will become too early for them to make any decisions on proceeding with the NBA Europe. As I say, those bids are not due until the end of the month. Instead, NBA team owners are going to vote on exploring domestic expansion. That could see Seattle and Las Vegas added, which would take the league to 32 teams, and that would represent the first expansion of the NBA since 2004. Now, when I was last here, back in October, when I sent my last dispatch, I think it was a bit warmer then as well, the media talk was about who was going to buy Warner Brothers Discovery. I think we talked at the time, it could have been Paramount, it could have been Netflix. Well, we know it is Paramount Skydance. And actually, Paramount remains the story here. The NFL wants to go early with its rights renewals. You know, they've seen what the NBA got, and the talk here is double the $10 billion a year that they get. You know, they are looking now at wanting up to $20 billion a year, which is, you know, a huge sum. And Paramount, because of the takeover by Skydance, change of control provision was enacted essentially, which means the NFL has the right to negotiate first with Paramount. So that's a kind of big media thing here to keep an eye out on when the NFL does go with early deals and exactly how much it's going to get. Quick one on baseball. There's a few embarrassed faces this week in New York after Venezuela, of all countries, beats the US in the World Baseball Classic final on Tuesday night. And then finally, I'm in the host city, or near enough the host city, of the 2026 World Cup final. It's just over in New Jersey. And, you know, apart from a few kind of posters in bars and restaurants, you wouldn't really say there's been much promotion of the World Cup. What promotion there has been focused on the US men's national team. The new Nike kit was launched just last week. I popped into the Nike store on Fifth Avenue. They had taken over a whole floor, really promoting that the USA team. I even popped up to the 4th floor, Catherine, and you'll be delighted to know that I found just two Canadian shirts. But they were well over $100, so I'm afraid I didn't buy you one. But I will speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.
Lovely. Thank you, John. He'll be moving on to Toronto next. So hopefully next week we'll get a piece from what's going down in Canada. Now let's look ahead. I've got a looking ahead in the business. It just came through my inbox right now about the FIFA Fan Fest for the World Cup matches here in Vancouver. And they're having a big music festival accompanying the live screening of all the matches at the Agricultural Exposition Fairgrounds in Vancouver. And the headliner band, and there's probably about 50 bands playing over the course of the month, the headliner is Motley Crue. Now, I had to look up to see if they were still alive, but they're all well, the current members, they're all around. They're in their early to mid to late 60s, and they are headlining Vancouver's heavy metal fan fest for the FIFA World Cup matches, and they'll be playing live on July 12th. That just came through my inbox, so I'll be looking ahead to that.
But Motley Crue, when they got together, didn't think that however many years later they'd be playing at something called the Agricultural Exhibition Fairground. You know, it's not really on brand for Motley Crue, is it? But fair play.
Not really on brand,
time passes.
no. It's the Pacific, the PNE, the Pacific National Exhibition, and normally they have like the world's biggest cow and the longest, courgette and things like that. So it's a bit out of character, isn't it? But they'll be showing live screenings of every single match, and it's going to be a terrific fan fest, I must say. Now, unless you have anything that you're looking ahead to, I had any other business piece that I wanted to mention. And I spoke to somebody this week who had watched coverage of the Sporting, the Lisbon team, round of 16 Champions League quarterfinal match against upstart Bodo Glimt from Norway. And it was obviously a stunning comeback of Sporting, who are now into the quarterfinals. But his point was that as he watched the match on the Sport TV5 app, he could hear the celebrations of every single goal coming from the apartment above, the apartment beside, and the bars down in the street from people who are watching on cable and IPTV. And his point was that latency is basically killing streaming adoption in Southern Europe. And in these cities, the big urban cities in Southern Europe, fiber to the home is very strong. And so the quality of pay TV broadcasts is excellent. So linear broadcasts are actually better for sports than streaming. And his point was that having your neighbors celebrate goals 15 to 20 seconds before you see them is destroying the live sports experience and preventing streaming from scaling effectively. And so I thought that was a really interesting point as we look at, the potential of Netflix and Amazon and so forth acquiring sports rights, which they haven't done to any great extent in Southern Europe. What are your thoughts? Has that affected you at all?
Yeah, I've had a similar-ish experience. I was living in North London. I think it was the latter half of 2019, and it was a very Arsenal-heavy area, this part of North London, and they were playing Manchester United. I was watching on a stream, I think Now TV streaming service, and clearly a lot of my neighbours weren't watching on a stream because Arsenal scored, and yeah, I heard about it about a minute before I saw it. So incidentally, I think, and I haven't looked this up to check, I think it may have been Bukayo Saka's first ever Premier League goal. He's obviously since gone on to sort of drape things with Arsenal and England, so but I'll always remember it as the goal that got spoiled for me. So that's the danger. That's why I've moved down south now. Down South London, you don't get any goals ruined around here.
So your neighbors can't cheer before you actually see it.
Well, it's a very 2026 issue in terms of being cranky at your neighbours. Like normally, the stereotype is the old man downstairs bangs on the door. He's like, keep the music down. And now it's banging on the door. And please, I'm watching on streaming and you're watching on linear and you're 15 seconds ahead of me. So please stop cheering.
I've had it where
it's not quite the same, is it?
Yeah, I've had it where friends are watching, even like on the same streaming platform, but theirs happens to be a few seconds ahead, and they text you when a goal goes in or something. And
that's so annoying.
Spoilers, exactly. It sounds like we've all had it. And you've got to be careful when people are at the game texting you, because obviously if you're at the game, you're normally a minute or so ahead. So I try to keep notifications off if I'm watching a game I'm particularly invested in these days.
We don't have that problem here because a few people live in, in busy urban centers and apartment blocks. Everyone has miles between their houses. So I don't hear the neighbors celebrating. Yeah.
Very nice.
Mm-hmm. Fayez, you had another piece of business that you wanted to bring up that I think Matt had some strong views on as well.
Yeah, I mean, so I was really bringing up the fact that of being a grumpy old man, and I'm going to fulfill that for my AOB. I'm just slightly astonished in the last couple of days to read the level of coverage in the sports pages of Rory McIlroy's Masters pre-dinner because he won it last year. Like, honestly, like I saw like a social media piece on it, like someone explaining that this is what Rory McIlroy is having for his dinner, and I was like, okay, like, why does anyone care? Surely that's just, internet chat. And then no, open up the pages of the Nationals, go to the sports tab, and there's a piece on what Rory McIlroy has chosen for the menu for his dinner. And I just don't understand. Like, I know everybody talks about getting closer to the stars these days and everybody wants to know. But like when I was doing journalism school, now I sound really old, but my tutor, he had two things. They were like, hey, you have to ask yourself, one, is it news? And two, does it pass the wallet test? As in, would you pay money to find out about this? Or, or does it pass the pub test? Can either of you make a cogent argument for why this is covered in the national news? It's a bloke going for dinner, like he's chosen steak or salmon, and someone's tried to put a spin on it because he's eating elk. Like, what have we become?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to have a go at making the opposing argument.
I appreciate it.
I mean, my strong feelings on it are basically that Fires is a grumpy old man, and this is a nice insight, into into what goes on behind the scenes at one of the world's most sort of prestigious sporting events, the Masters. I think it's cool. I think it's sort of a window into the clubhouse, into the event, and kind of you can imagine yourself, sat there sort of sharing a glass of wine with Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy, and it's a nice sort of night fire. And then to your point about does it pass the pub test, I can imagine a debate start or a chat about what would you have on your menu in the Fires, if in the unlikely or highly unlikely event you were to win the Masters, what would you have on your menu?
I would have a disclaimer that it can't be made public, and it's just for the sort of 40 or so people around the table, because most people wouldn't care. But yeah, I feel like him telling people, oh, I ate champ because I ate it as a kid, and just come on, we can all do better. Like, I wish him well. I've got no personal animus towards Rory McIlroy. He's a great player and all of that, but I mean, this is just one of those where like we've gone a bit far, and the fact that everyone's picked it up, it must be a slow week in golf.
Well, you did mention, you said the steak or fish and elk. Is that what he's chosen? What has he chosen?
Catherine, you're making me talk about it now. Yeah,
come on, I'm curious.
Look,
I'm interested.
Look at how interesting it is. It's so engaging.
All right, okay, here we go. So he's having, as part of the appetizers, there's grilled elk served with caramelized onion jam and roasted garlic aioli. That's one of his appetizers.
Lovely.
Please don't make me say any more.
Yeah, good. Okay. Well, I'm sure we can touch upon this again in next week's podcast.
Can't wait.
Find out what the main course is. I'll look forward to that. Great. Well, you two, thank you very much. That was good fun. And it was certainly a cricket fest this week, wasn't it? And I think it's very, very fitting given that the IPL is starting next week. Thank you both very much. You can look out for those analyses on the Sport Business sponsorship page, where we'll have all the latest deep insights from you two on cricket and everything else. And I'm sure we'll have you both back on the podcast very soon. Thanks a lot. And we will be back next week with the Sport Business Podcast. To our listeners, if you want to know more about today's stories or any of our other reports and analyses, and especially if you're looking for the world's largest collection of accurate rights fees across media and sponsorship, you know where to go. Take a look at subscription options on our website or get in touch with us via email at info@sportbusiness.com. And that's info@sportbusiness.com. And as always, if you enter the code SBPodcast30 at the checkout, you'll get a 30% discount on annual and monthly Sport Business subscriptions. Please don't forget to share your thoughts on this episode and give us your feedback in a review on the Apple Podcasts and Spotify platforms. And watch for our weekly LinkedIn posts promoting the podcast, where you can, of course, also leave a comment. Thank you all for tuning in, for reading, and for subscribing. I'm Catherine Davies, and we'll be back again next week with the Sport Business Podcast.